Hey everybody, this is the lesson for um, February 17th, 2021. Okay, your do now today will be genre. Okay, will be based around the word genre. My favorite genre of book. My favorite genre I'm just writing this down, of book to read is blank. Okay, so genre is like what category or what kind of like topic, you know what I'm saying? Um, is it outdoor? Is it um, is it comedy? Um, is it books that are based about natural disasters, things like that? Okay, so are they science books? Okay, all right. So my favorite genre of book to read is blank. Okay, all right. So now we're jumping back into. We started to read this. And just to review, um, they were going to meet in the town square, right? Okay. We know that there's some sort of event that's about to take place. Um, okay. The villagers pronounced his name Delacroix. Eventually made a great pile of stones in one corner of the square and guarded against the raids of other boys. So there were boys who were gathering stones. Soon the men began to gather, surveying their own children, speaking of planting and rain, tractors and taxes. So they're just kind of having some small talk with other men. They stood together away from the pile of stones in the corner, and their jokes were quiet, and they smiled rather than laughed. Okay, so that tells me something. They smiled rather than laughed. To me, that almost seems like it makes it seem like it's maybe a little bit tense, right? Have you ever been in a situation where you were, maybe somebody tells a joke and yeah, normally it would be a funny joke, but you're kind of tense, so it's just kind of like you just kind of smile, kind of giggle under your breath, whatever. Okay, you're not really into it, right? It makes me wonder if things are pretty tense. Okay. It says they greeted one another and exchanged bits of gossip as they went to join their husbands. Soon the women standing by their husbands began to call their children, and the children came reluctantly, having to be called 4 or 5 times. Bobby Martin ducked under his mother's grasping hand and ran, laughing back to the pile of stones. His father spoke up sharply, and Bobby came quickly and took his place between his father and his oldest brother. Okay, so all right, so we have done 134, 135. Okay, so now we're moving into this page right here. Okay, 136 and 137. Okay, so conduct means to blank or carry out an event or process. Okay, so to conduct means to lead or carry out, to organize. Okay, all right, to organize or carry out an event or process. Who would be a good choice to conduct an after-school book group? Okay, the blank would be a good choice to conduct an after-school book group. Okay, so that's conduct. To conduct means to lead or to organize an event. Okay, to precede means to come before something else. Okay, so if you precede your friend in line, in the lunch line, that means that you're before your friend in the lunch line. Okay, you precede them. All right. What is one action that might precede a good grade on a test? Well, what do you guys think? One action that might precede a good grade on a test is blank. Okay, would probably be like studying or asking the teacher for clarification on questions you might have, things like that. Okay, all right, so let's read this together. Whoops. Um, the lottery was conducted, as were the square dances, the teenage club, the Halloween program, by Mr. Summers, who had time and energy to devote to civic activities. He was a round-faced, jovial man, and he ran the coal business, and people were sorry for him, because he had no children and his wife was a scold. When he arrived in the square, carrying the black wooden box, there was a murmur of conversation among the villagers, and he waved and called, "Little late today, folks." The postmaster, Mr. Graves, followed him, carrying a three-legged stool, and the stool was put in the center of the square, and Mr. Summers set the black box down on it. The villagers kept their distance, leaving a space between themselves and the stool, and when Mr. Summers said, "Some of you fellows want to give me a hand," there was a hesitation before two men. Mr. Martin and his oldest son, Baxter, came forward to hold the box steady on the stool while Mr. Summers stirred up the papers inside it. Okay, so what do you guys think the stool is? All right, so devote means to give all of one's time or attention to a cause or activity. Okay. All right, next page over. Let's see. The original paraphernalia for the lottery had been lost long ago, and the black box now resting on the stool had been put into use even before Old Man Warner, the oldest man in town, was born. Mr. Summers spoke frequently to the villagers about making a new box, but no one liked to upset even as much tradition as was represented by the black box. There was a story that the present box had been made with some pieces of the box that had preceded it, the one that had been constructed when the first people settled down to make a village here. Every year after the lottery, Mr. Summers began talking again about a new box, but every year the subject was allowed to fade off without anything being done. The black box grew shabbier each year. By now it was no longer completely black, but splintered badly along one side to show the original wood color, and in some places faded or stained. Mr. Martin and his oldest son, Baxter, held the black box securely on the stool until Mr. Summers had stirred the papers thoroughly with his hand. Because so much of the ritual had been forgotten or discarded, Mr. Summers had been successful in having slips of paper substituted for the chips of wood that had been used for generations. Chips of wood, Mr. Summers had argued, had been all very well when the village was tiny, but now that the population was more than 300 and likely to keep on growing, it was necessary to use something that would fit more easily into the black box. The night before the lottery, Mr. Summers and Mr. Graves made up the slips of paper and put them in a box, and it was then taken to the safe of Mr. Summers' Coal Company and locked up until Mr. Summers was ready to take it to the square the next morning. The rest of the year the box was put away, sometimes at one place, sometimes another. It had spent 1 year in Mr. Graves's barn and another year underfoot in the post office, and sometimes it was set on a shelf in the Martin grocery and left there. Okay, all right, so it says what happens when Mr. Summers arrives with the black box. Okay, I want you to find that within the text. Analyze the plot. Okay, so the plot is like the sequence of events, right? How do the villagers respond to the arrival of the black box? What might this tell you about the box? Okay, the villagers blank. Okay, and then reread paragraph 5, which is right here. Okay, in what way might Mr. Summers' talk of a new box be part of the tradition of the lottery? Mr. Summers' talk, okay, his talk of the new box, in what way do you think it's a part of the tradition of the lottery? Okay. All right, I'm just going to read it again. The original paraphernalia for the lottery had been lost long ago, and the black box now resting on the stool had been put into use even before Old Man Warner, the oldest man in the town, was born. Mr. Summers spoke frequently to the villagers about making a new box, but no one liked to upset even as much tradition as was represented by the black box. There was a story that the present box had been made with some pieces of the box that had preceded it, the one that had been constructed when the first people settled down to make a village here. Every year after the lottery, Mr. Summers began talking again about a new box, but every year the subject was allowed to fade off without anything being done. The black box grew shabbier each year. By now it was no longer completely black, but splintered badly along one side to show the original wood color, and in some places faded or stained. Okay, so let's look at this. Okay, Mr. Summers' talk shows that the villagers resist change. Every year he asks them, and they resist the change, right? Okay, the box grows shabbier each year, but the villagers don't want to upset even as much tradition as was represented by the box. Okay, so they don't want to like curse themselves by changing it, right? Okay, they have this ritual, and they don't want to change it. They don't want to curse themselves in any way. Is kind of what I gather from that. Okay, kind of a longer video today. I'm going to go ahead and push and end this video. Let's make sure you get page 136 and 137 done. Have a great day, guys.